Historical Norse makeup. How to put on a Norse face, not to be confused with North Face, the clothing line for yuppies that want to look like they go outside. In my last video, I went over chin lines with Nordic makeup and how those are ahistorical, invalid, and harmful because they are appropriating an indigenous practice. Also because it engages within harmful stereotypes of that primitive or savage kind of look that white Christian anthropologists have perpetuated over many centuries now. I think the origin of the looks that you're seeing come from a lot of goth style makeup, very alt kind of looks, and that has definitely verged into problematic looks appropriating indigenous cultures, as well as this scene specifically in Vikings where Lagertha, during a bloat ritual to bless the land, wipes blood down her chin. The intent of that scene was to actually cause shock in the Anglo-Saxon Christians because they had given them some farmland and like all of a sudden, ooh, there's these scary pagans. But I think a lot of people thought it looked cool and then just started doing it, not realizing that you're engaging in that harmful stereotype look, that primitive, barbarian, non-Christian look. Because historically, people other than Christian have been seen by Christian colonizers as primitive, as backwards. And that's where you get a lot of that stereotypical look that people are engaging in because they want to move away from Christianity. And moving away from Christianity is perfectly valid, but at the same time, you do not want to engage in the same harmful stereotypes as the dominant ideology that you're trying to get away from. That would be counterintuitive. And again, that goes back to that deconstruction where you're trying to assess things and you're trying to see what influences are there that you need to get rid of. It can take a lot of introspection to get there. And one of the ways we do that is by looking at historical sources. Historical sources keep us accountable and they hold us to a certain standard. There is room for personal gnosis. I'll go over that at the end of this video. But what ends up happening within pagan communities, people will have this personal gnosis and then somebody else will base their personal gnosis off that personal gnosis, and then somebody else will base their personal gnosis off that person's personal gnosis that was based off of this person's personal gnosis that has no cited historical sources whatsoever. It is fine to have personal gnosis. However, you must cite that personal gnosis. Cite your sources, whether it's history or it's personal gnosis. And there's not a lot of hard data that we actually get. We do not have an unbroken chain of traditions being passed down. We are reconstructing, we are rebuilding religions based on archaeological record and interpretation of what little sources we do have. And then that gnosis fills in the gaps of that religion. So a few of the sources that we do have graves of some people that were buried with some kind of makeup items. There's specifically a woman in Fjerkjær, Denmark that was buried around 980 AD, towards the end of the Viking Age. The Viking Age was about 780 to 1000 AD. She was buried with a wand, a certain finery, and henbane seeds. Henbane seeds have kind of a toxic effect that can cause hallucinations, so it's possible that she did some kind of ecstatic practice like Seither. But she was also buried with a little brooch box that had white lead in it. And it's possible, unconfirmed, but possible that she used that as face makeup. We see later on in like the Elizabethan period that they also used lead makeup. Lead is very toxic. I do not recommend it. And definitely if you're going to use makeup, use something that is regulated, approved, safe, and clean. In the Elizabethan period, the wealthy were using the lead makeup to cover their syphilis sores that were all over their face. Nasty. Another source for markings, specifically on the body, Ibn Fadlan. If you're familiar with 13th Warrior, this is the character that Antonio Banderas plays. In reality, he was actually on a diplomatic mission from the Abbasid Caliphate going into the Volga area of Russia, and he did not have a Beowulf-style adventure. But he wrote that they had tattoos from the tips of their nails to the neck, and he said that the tattoos looked like trees. That's pretty vague. Was that not work? Was that tree tattoos? Was it something that just kind of looked like trees? We have no idea. We just know what he said he saw, and this was also what he called the Rusia, which are likely the Roose. These were a type of Swedish Vikings. Roose means something like rower, and this is most likely where Russia gets its name. The Roose settled in Kiev, so it's also possible that the Roose that he encountered were being influenced by Slavic cultures because they were a mixture of Slavic and Nordic cultures. So it's possible that the tattoos that he saw were, one, only specific to these Vikings and no other Nordic peoples. And 2, it may have been a Slavic tradition and not a Nordic one. We have no idea. We can only speculate based on the knowledge and information that we have. And one of the best sources for Nordic makeup is Al-Tartushi. This is another Arabic source. This is another diplomat. He was coming out of Muslim Spain, and he encountered people that were within the border of Denmark and Germany. This may just be specific to those people, and he encountered them in about 950 AD. This is the quote. There is also an artificial makeup for the eyes. When they use, in beauty never fades. On the contrary, it increases in men and women as well. So this is probably something like you see in Vikings with Floki. There's also times when Lagertha had this like eye strip. Again, we don't really know for sure how it was used or why it was used. It may have just been to decrease sun glare, like what some baseball players do by putting that black strip under their eye. And this is something that is not gender specific. This is something he saw in men and women. That means guy liner is historically valid. And that's it. That's all we have. If you're looking for sources and ideas on what to do that are not these problematic trends, these clout chasers that are trying to hop on the bandwagon of a makeup style, I would suggest looking into the SCA as well as other reenactors and people that have just done tons of research on this stuff. There are so many people out there that dedicate their lives to having an authentic look. You will see more creative expression in the garb they wear rather than any kind of makeup. Turtle brooches, beads, tunics, dresses, braids in the hair. Married women specifically braided their hair. Unmarried women had loose hair but might put like a bonnet on or something. And it can depend on time period and where you're at and all that stuff. You don't have to get super specific if you're just doing it for fun. When I garb up, I wear bracers. Bracers are not historical, but they're fun. It's okay to have fun as long as it's not something that is appropriative or something that causes harm because it engages in a negative stereotype. All pagans are valid as long as they do not cause harm. And again, that comes back to deconstruction. When somebody tells you something is wrong or belongs to another culture that you may not necessarily understand, don't double down on ignorance. Say thank you and try to fix yourself. Look it up. Do your own research. We live in an age where you can literally Google information. 40, 100 years ago, people had to rely on hearsay and hopefully a book came out. We are not restricted by that in this day and age. You can easily look stuff up all the time. And that being said, Personalnosis. Your gnosis is perfectly valid as long as it does not cause harm. Gnosis is how we fill in the gaps of what we don't know in the historical record. This can be how you specifically do bloat. This can be some kind of makeup style that makes you feel more connected to the gods, Vatir, ancestors, or your spirituality in general. These are the specific things that you do that make your religion yours. That is perfectly valid. There are lore lawyers out there who will tell you it's not. They will try to actually you to death. And to a certain extent, we need that because we should cite our sources, but also cite your UPG. So when you do not know something for certain, and this is something that you are guessing, cite it. There were a lot of people in the comments on that last video that were stating things that are not in the archaeological record, that are not in any kind of historical source. They were stating it as though it were hard fact when we do not know for sure. That can spread misinformation, and to their credit, they are probably hearing it from somebody else that they think is a trusted source that is not a trusted source. Look up historical sources, look up what we do know in the archaeological record, understand there's a lot of gaps and that we have to fill in those gaps with personal gnosis. Your gnosis is valid. All pagans are valid unless their beliefs cause harm. Cultural appropriation is harmful. Spreading misinformation is harmful. If you don't know something for certain or it is gnosis, please cite that source. Skull!